which are inherent to post-structuralism. Let us look at the first hyphen in my title, that is research. Obviously, as literary club members, you all are uh, wonderful researchers. But this evening, I want to research post-structuralism. Why? To begin with, post-structuralism, in my opinion, is an ossified entity in the field of critical discourse these days. In fact, in this era of post-colonialism, it's almost passé. So, if we are now looking at it almost 5 decades later since its inception, and in the 21st century, we would have to research it. In my opinion, there's an urgency as far as this research goes, because right now English studies as a discipline, as a discursive practice, is facing a major crisis. To begin with, reading as a notion has hit its nadir. If at all anybody reads, most students don't read, but if at all general, even if you have to look at general readers, if at all people read anything, it's the do it yourself kind of books, the self help books, or personality development kind of books. Literature itself has grown to be a tiny little island with no moorings with the larger continent, so to say. Furthermore, criticism thereof, that is, criticism of literature, is something that is considered almost quixotic. Almost quixotic, why? Because even in syllabus designing of the PG English literature kind of courses, there is a critiquing of criticism as a possible subject. Often there is a kind of suspicion, skepticism, if it is any worth at all in syllabi that think of English studies as skills oriented, as ESP, as use and user obsessed, as so to say liberal studies. In such a scenario, a critical look is considered too theoretical, too ivory towerish. Well, it can indeed be argued that this alienation of criticism from the public space, this representation of literary studies as an elitist something that wonderfully well paid university professors with the fifth or sixth or seventh or whatever pay commission, who have nothing to do with lived realities, in a way starts with post structuralism. Till the 1960s or mid 1960s, when post structuralism, so to say, starts establishing itself, criticism was something that the common man, the lay person, could connect with, could relate to. With some effort, even an ordinary student could understand the tenets of new criticism. With the advent of post structuralism, with its oh so difficult terminology itself, there is a feel that literary criticism and by extension English studies is as tough as rocket science, but with no Tesla car on the horizon. In other words, what is being argued right now or these days is that when you do uh, critical studies or when you do literature itself, there is nothing solid in return to offer. Now, given this kind of context, moreover, there is the advent of the AI. This situation, because the advent of the AI is getting still more quagmirish. Students these days do not even need to look at or to look up sites on the Google or whichever might be the search engine that they prefer. The generative AI can write an essay on post-structuralism in terms that are that can outsmart Derrida himself. With such an annihilation of criticism of English studies facing a genuine uh, issue, genuine problem, I feel there is this is the time. Now is the time to research itself. That is the research by and of post-structuralism, which my presentation, I hope, tries to open up. Having thus talked about the first hyphenation in my title, let me briefly discuss the second hyphen, post-structuralism. As we go along, I shall talk of the very many meanings of this post which would clarify this notion. Well, uh, let me first give you a few examples. What exactly is the basic most concept of post-structuralism? Post-structuralism decenters determinate meanings. Post-structuralism view is that no text can mean what it supposedly says. So, for a post-structuralist critique, a text is a chain of signifiers whose seeming determinacy of meanings and apparent reference to an extra textual world are mere illusory effects that are produced by the differential play and conflicting internal forces which deconstruct a text into an open-ended, undecidable scatter of significations which can even be diametrically opposed to each other. To understand this central concept better, I would like to discuss two examples. The first example is a poem that we mostly meet in our 8th standard. The poem is with us again in the junior college, and yet again it haunts us in the FY additional English class. Not to forget the genre specific poetry course, and the poem chases us in the post-graduation courses as well. In fact, so ever present is this poem that one of my PG students asked me in a very Sherlock Holmesian tone if the poet wrote only this one poem. Yes, wonderful researchers that you are, you must have guessed which poem I'm referring to. Yes, it is composed upon, that is Westminster Bridge by Wordsworth. Now, let us see if it can exemplify the above notion, that is, a text is a chain of significant signifiers whose seeming determinacy of meaning and apparent reference to an extra textual world are illusory effects that are produced by the differential play and conflicting internal forces which deconstruct the text into an open-ended, undecidable scatter of significations which can even be diametrically opposed to each other. Initially, in our school days, we laboriously tried to understand the figures of speech in the poem, personification and hyperbole. Why? The poem begins with a huge exaggeration, and in line number 9 and 11, this hyperbolic effect is repeated. As we travel with the poem into junior college, we realize that the central metaphor of the poem, yet another figure of speech, is the city of London as the heart of England. Wordsworth self-confessedly, as he writes in his letter, and also his sister Dorothy Wordsworth also does that, is watching the city during an early summer morning when the city is quiet, and he described the capital as calm, as if it is alive but resting. In the FY additional English classroom, depending on the lecturer who teaches us, we are taken into the early 19th century British context, that is, an industrially awakening, hugely colonizing country whose center and hence the World Trade Center was London. Later on, in our PG classroom, our teacher is going to open up the post colonial aspects of the poem and how, despite his praise of London, it is also a critique of London and its man made bridge, circumscribing the vast nature, the pantheistic nature. In the TY special Poetry as a Genre paper, we get to know the Petrarchan sonnet structure and how it could exemplify the poet's ambiguous attitude to the bridge and to London as an industrialized World Trade Center. Further, as we enter the portal of the university, we understand that the poem is quasi epiphrastic. The words, in other words, the words that Wordsworth uses are clearly quasi impressionistic. They are almost like impressionistic brush strokes, wherein the bridge mostly gets the green color or the green effect, It is significant in this context. I would like to maintain that we should remember that the green is the color of the leather seats in the House of Commons, which is on the side of House, the Palace of Westminster. Uh, Now, we must also in this context remember that in contrast to Lambeth as well as the Lambeth Bridge, the other end, which is at the other end of the bridge, we have the House of Lords. The House of Lords would have the red seats. In a way, thus the poet seems to be making in the poem a very politically charged statement. As we know, Westminster is a metonym for the UK Parliament, the British government, not to forget the Westminster system of governance. Given the kind of very French kind of sympathies that Wordsworth has, in my opinion, this matters a lot. In other words, by the time we are about to complete our PG and we start fumbling our initial footsteps into research, we realize that the poem Upon the Westminster Bridge is an exploration of a paradox central to its quasi-painterly presentation, that is man-made London and its possible relationship to an organic whole, which the colonies represent. Given our now in 2024, given our Greta Thunberg kind of consciences, we can look at the poem through the environmental awareness kind of vision. In other words, the 14 lines are a vortex of meanings which need no complementing with each other. Now, now let me attempt another example. It's a literary text made into a film multiple times. The wonderful scholars that you are, you must have sure, I'm sure, you must have understood which text I'm referring to. Oh yes, I'm referring to Devdas, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's Bengali novel published in 1917. Its intersemiotic translations as a film has been attempted in Bengali itself, in Hindi, in Telugu, in Tamil, in Urdu, in Assamese, in Malayalam, and oh yes, there was a silent film version of the text as well. Now let us see how the original text and some of the intersemiotic translations of the text are an interplay of multiple possible significations, which may not necessarily complement, which could even contradict each other. Sharachandra Chattopadhyay, the author, is, in my humble opinion, more into class criticism in the text. As part of the Bengal Renaissance, he is opening up the Bhadralok consciousness, which was facing socio-cultural, more than socio-cultural, socio-economic transitions, which were questioning the Bhadralok identity as upper caste Brahmins and as upper class Zamindars, as upper caste Brahmins and as upper class Zamindars. Now, that is, in my opinion, the look at the text. Now, let us look at its intersemiotic translation, some of them. The 1955 Bimal Roy's Devdas is more a tragedy. And my submission is that it is the tragedy of the confused idealist in the post-independence India. I would also like to mention or maintain that the Bimal Roy's Devdas of 1955 is more into a conscious exploration of the Karun Ras. Somewhere there's an attempt to locate it within the Indianness as a post-colonial sort of construct. Now let us look at another possible kind of intersemiotic translation, that is the 2002 magnum opus by Sanjay Leela Bhansali. It has grand sets, it has larger than life presentation, it sort of goes away from the text in multiple ways. I would say that what Bhansali is trying to say attempt is a mere exploration of a love triangle, of course in wonderfully couched colors and stuff like that in a very typical Bollywood mode. So one could say that he seems to delimit the complexity of both the author as well as a director like Bimal Roy. Now let us look at yet another intersemiotic translation of the text, that is the 2009 Devdi by Anurag Kashyap. One could say, I would like to argue that it is, unlike the earlier attempts, more an exploration of the original story from the women's point of view. So, my submission is that these two examples that I tried to provide, however sketchily attempted, should prove the basic post-acrylic proposition that the reader or the spectator is free to enter the literary or audiovisual text in whichsoever way he or she chooses. In other words, there are not any limits to signifying possibilities according to post-structuralism. Having thus entered the post-structuralist field, which appears to me to be a puzzle within a mystery which is a riddle, let us look at the post aspect of my title. The post, in my opinion, has two possible meanings. Post, I'm here, post dash, I'm taking post here to be a prefix. Post here can mean after, and if it is not a prefix, then it can mean beyond. Let us first look at the first post, that is after, post as a prefix. It is my humble submission that post structuralism is post, that is after, in two ways. Number one, it is post structuralism after structuralism. May I explain this a little? What does post structuralism do? Post structuralism displaces structuralism from its prominence as a radically uh, innovative way of dealing with language and other signification or signifying system. How? First and foremost, the post-structuralists found structuralism quasi-scientific and hence a rigid formation. This rigid formation was attempted by two people, obviously Saussure on language, and number two, Levi Strauss in the cultural anthropology kind of context. Why was such a systemic structure problematic? Post-structuralism maintains that a systemic structure, whether Saussurean or Levi-Straussian, assumes, presupposes a center. What does a center do? It organizes, controls the structure, but it itself escapes any structurality. Thus, center is problematic, or centering is problematic because it is ever active, ever controlling, and yet always absent or beyond any definition for itself. It thus stands for all of logocentrism, which depends on the notion of a base that is self certifying, which is, in other words, an absolute, an essence that defines all, but never itself is defined. The major post-structuralists, be it Derrida, Foucault, Lacan, Barthes, one can go on listing names, explore in various ways the decentering, the sort of the opening up, the decentering, to repeat it again, of the structuralist insistence on the existence of the self-evident foundations that guarantee the truth value and thus have a very deterministic position. Hence, post-structuralism is post, that is after structuralism. Now, post-structuralism post in yet another way. I'm still with post as a essentially prefix. So it is post in yet another way. It can be argued that it is post. It is after what can be called the enlightenment, so to say. It is post enlightenment. What exactly do I mean by this? What exactly I'm trying to say when I'm making this assertion, I'm trying to argue that post-structuralism transcends the idea of a centered, pre-given human subject as the base of social constructs, be it knowledge or be it truth. That is to say, unlike the Enlightenment, it rejects the subjectivity of the transcendent, rational individual of the Enlightenment. However, the post in post-structuralism without the hyphenation, that is, it's not essentially a prefix. What would it mean? If it is not a separable prefix, if it is part of the entire word, one can then say, just a minute, I'm sorry, one can then say that post would not mean after, rather, it would mean beyond structuralism. What would be the actions of post-structuralism in this context? It would assert that more than merely a linguistic meaning making, what is needed is an analysis of the power relations. The traditional, absolute, universal truths are thus better understood if we look at the power relations. How? Post-structuralism would maintain that be it the traditional author or be it the individual as defined traditionally, his supposed agency in the world is not supported by cultural tools. Rather, it is the cultural tools that set up actions which the agent merely realizes. In brief, post-structuralism is an attempt to explore how a subject is constituted. It tries to explore the power, the right to define truth, thereby opening up alternatives rejected by hoary traditions, so to say. Hence, it questions the binary positioning of the center and its other, which by definition, the other by definition is denied any validity, any potency, be it written versus spoken language, man versus woman, adult versus child, to cite a few examples. Instead of such a priori fixations that are essentialist, post-structuralism goes beyond such self-certifying meaning-making structures and opens up new modes of thinking about difference and identity. Now, let us understand a few concepts through which post-structuralism attempts these alternative modes. So, now we'll be looking at four concepts. Number one, the notion of discourse. Number two, the decentering of the subject. Number three, the primacy of theory. Number four, the multidisciplinarity of this mode of analysis. Finally, after having discussed these four, finally, we shall try to research, if possible, the relevance in the context today of post-structuralism. We are attempting such an overview of the premises underlying post-structuralism because each author associated with post-structuralism, be it Derrida, Foucault, Barthes, Rorty, Lacan, Deleuze, as I said, one can continue the list and to show off one's specialization. I don't want to do that. Fine. I would like to say that each and every critique associated with post-structuralism would take at least 2 hours to be presented in some detail. Given I suppose that I would be given some 45 minutes long discussion, possibly that would not be possible, and therefore I'm looking at these four basic notions: the notion of discourse, the decentering of subject, the primacy of theory, and the multidisciplinarity of the post-structuralist analysis. Let us begin this analysis or this exploration of post-structuralism with the notion of discourse. Discourse in the post-structuralist context, I must clarify, does not have much to share with the linguistic definition. Like, for example, the way discourse is defined by people such as Austin, Searle, Grice, and others. Discourse in the post-structuralist context, my submission is more an analysis of power structures, as in the Foucauldian analysis of the varied discursive formations which are generated by the configurations of power in a given time and place. Later on, we shall discuss this a little more when it comes to the multidisciplinarity embedded in post-structuralism. Right now, let us look at the second major feature of the post-structuralist critique, which is the decentering of the subject. Post-structuralism, uh, as I mentioned earlier, is post-enlightenment. So, post-structuralism consists of a focused criticism of the of humanism, of the traditional notion that is an author or the human subject as a coherent identity with initiative and purposefulness, an agent whose design and intentions impact the form of the meaning of a literary product or of any product, literary, linguistic, or any product. To begin with, post structuralism transcends the structuralist notion of the subject as a mere location, as a space wherein the differential elements and codes of a systemic lang result into a particular parole. Instead, post-structuralism argues that there is no such controlling code at all. Instead, there is an eternal and unregulated play of purely relational elements. In other words, the subject, as either the author or the narrator, is a purely textual product as well, and that narrator or the author is trying to rather vainly master the incessant, so to say, free play of decentered signifiers. If Paul de Man says that the subject is a mere grammatical pronoun, Foucault and Barthes use this dismissal of the traditional notion of the author as the disappearance or death of the author. In other words, Foucault and Barthes are denying the validity of the key function, that is the central role given to a unique individual with a very purposive, powerful subject as origin of all knowledge and thus the determiner of the form and meaning of a text at the center as the organizing principle. Hence, we have to analyze the next feature of post-structuralism, that is the primacy of theory. In the post-structuralist canon, theory refers to the oppositional stance. If post-structuralist theories are posed in direct opposition to standard inherited ways of thinking in all the aspects of knowledge, so to say, post-structuralist theories challenge and destabilize, undermine, subvert the foundational assumptions, concepts, procedures, and findings in all the traditional notions of discourse. Given such consciously oppositional stance, post-structuralism is more interested in opening up the concealment or the concealing of the actual functioning of the signifying system. Hence, by definition, post-structuralism is multidisciplinary. Modes of feminism, psychoanalysis, and Marxism are manifest within post-structuralism. The post-structuralist tendency to decenter the functions of the subject position as a self-coherent, purposeful, determining agency helps us question the traditional notions and helps us understand why post-structuralism is essentially multidisciplinary. Instead, post-structuralism would maintain that the subject is considered to be a disunified self subjected to power play of traditional gender roles and how the gender roles define language, the uncontrollable workings of unconscious compulsions, that is the post-structuralist psychoanalysis, or a conveyor of the current forms of ideology. In brief, a site, SIT site, traversed by the cultural constructs and the discursive formations engendered by the structures of power in a particular era or in a particular text, so to say. Given this multidisciplinarity, I'm so sorry, given this multidisciplinary decentering of the author function, in within post-structuralism, the reader or the interpreter becomes the focal figure. Now, unlike the author, the focal figure, even if, I'm so sorry, unlike the author, the reader, even if he is the focal figure, does not boast of the attributes of purposiveness, initiative of any agency. Hence, instead of obsessing with a literary work, the reader engages with a text, not with a work, but rather a text, which is a mere structure of signifiers accorded to the reading process. So, texts are not uniquely individual, rather, they represent écriture, the all inclusive textuality, the writing in general, which transcends the traditional boundaries between literary, philosophical, historical, legal, and all other such types, because all such boundaries are superficial, artificial, and the post-structuralist view is that any text, whatever might be the genre as just now explained, that is legal, literary, etc., etc., is a chain of signifiers. Their so-called determinacy, the so-called determinacy of these signifiers, their determinacy of meaning is to the extra-textual world as well, is an undecidable scatter of multiple, at times even oppositional significations. In a way, post-structuralism, like deconstruction, is trying to, or deconstruction, or for that matter reader response theory, is trying to or seems to free the reader from any limits. Now that I have tried to explain my understanding of post-structuralism, now let us briefly look at the problems that such the post-structuralist theory posits. First and foremost, it leads to an excessive individualism which contradicts the very basis of post-structuralism, because it gives a unique agency, a special subjecthood to the individual critic, to the individual as the creator of textual meanings. Yet another problem is that such excessive individualism, devoid of any evaluative standards, can lead to both number one, elitism, and number two, authoritarianism, so to say. For example, I may say that in my opinion, the real villain in Othello is not Iago. In my opinion, it is Roderigo. Because there is a free play available in the text. Fine. So here I would like to then say that Roderigo is the one who exposes poor Desdemona and her escapades to her father. He thus leads to her trial in the council. He's I can maintain that he's not the stooge. I'm just giving an example. He's not the stooge of Iago, but rather he's using Iago's so-called intelligence to suit his purpose. The problem of such games, if we continue them, is that the reader is acquiring the subject position as a specialist and has to be listened to, because I'm constructing in this way, fine, and I'm constructing meanings of a text in this way, and you better listen to me. Others, as I said, better listen to such specialized constructs, or else be considered morons lacking intellectual and critical finesse. In other words, uh, the post-structuralism promises freedom and ends up as a top-down mode of discourse, with power operating as a way of othering whom the clique chooses to dislike. In other words, what begins as freedom ends up as the ultimate prison. If it is so, what are the possible solutions? what are the possible solutions to power mongering, so to say. Number one, I would say, is should be the rise of the organic intellectual who questions the discourse and the resulting power equations, not upside down but from below, because post-structuralism coalesces into an upside down kind of model, and then it goes far away from the common reader, from the student, and it becomes a kind of intellectual clique, as I said, which has its own specialized techniques to analyze and then consider others morons, like intellectual lacking intellectual critical finesse. Fine. If that has to be denied, then the only possibility is there should be the rise of the organic intellectual who questions the discourse and the resulting power equations from below. Number one. Number two, I would say there is a necessity of realizing that any and every analysis is a product of the socio-cultural context. Historicize should be the obvious kind of mantra. In a way, I would like to say new historicism and post-colonial, and more importantly even decoloniality, would address these issues more constructively. And I would like to say that these kind of uh, modes of criticism are opening up in interesting ways. We'll also have to look at the way the technology is creating its own critique. And I would say then post structuralism, which is in a way very passe, would have a kind of, so to say, mm, analytical relevance as an analytical tool. That's all that I have to say for the timing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Agnihotri.
Can I
This
sort of
was,
know? Just a minute, sir. I took exactly
yeah,
45 minutes as I was told to.
thank you so much for that. I began my small introduction with the curiosity to actually know how will you be able to fit in so many things within post-structuralism, and you have done credibly. I mean, this is so comprehensive, and the nuggets were so good. You began in the Eliotesque sense, very, very high modern sense, with your epigraph, "In my beginning is my end." You went to a very, very modern poem. I underline "Composed upon Westminster Bridge" is a poem which is relevant even today. And you showed it how, for example, you connected it all the way with even eco criticism. So it can open up to so many interpretations. Then, of course, you went into your two hyphens, uh, and you brought in, for example, I was reminded of Cleant Brooks's paradox when you said there is an underlying central paradox in the poem. You went into Devdas and its various translations and renditions, from Bimal Roy to Sanjay Leela Bhansali, Anurag Kashyap, and so on. And these are two very good examples. And then, of course, through to Sassorian and Levi-Strauss, and the critique of the Enlightenment and how it goes along. Very, very attack on quote unquote truth, and the binaries through which often, through the lens of which we often see things. And of course, towards the end, you sort of, if I may say, through your aspects on the discourse, on decentering the subject, on the primacy of theory, the dialectical nature of theory itself, and the multidisciplinarity of discourses and theory. You, in a way, deconstructed post-structuralism also. And towards the end, you sort of kind of reminded Frederick Jameson's "always historicize the statement that he had made. I would say this was within and to keep it all within 45 minutes, very very commendable indeed.
Thank you,
Uh,
sir.
I would certainly then like to know interactions, reactions, questions, queries by all. Ruthvi will, of course, moderate if people have jotted down questions and shared. Please, Ruthvi. Or even Parth, I think, is overlooking.
Yes.
Are there any queries in the question box, or what is it called? In the chat box?
Not yet in the chat
Not
box.
as of now.
The floor is now open for questions, discussions, interaction. Participants can directly unmute. You can also put it in the chat box if you like. I mean, while that happens, I'll begin with my own query. Madam, you said that, to the reader, the text represents an all-inclusive textuality. This textuality is a very, very abstract term sometimes. And then when you say all-inclusive textuality, there are other shades to it. So for our students here, I would request you to elaborate a little over this term, all-inclusive textuality.
Uh, uh, okay. Can I, to explain it further, can I get back to my analysis of the Wordsworth poem?
Certainly, madam.
So, as I tried to establish there, what one is trying to analyze is we begin looking at the to begin. I mean, I take it for granted that everybody here understands the difference between work and text. That I have taken for granted. So, if we then start looking at the text, I would like to say that look at the poem. In a way, the poem, as we understand it as students, begins in a very work like way. We look at the language, how the language constructs the poem for us as through hyperbole, as through, for example, like let's say something like a metaphor, or for that matter, the personification. Then we realize as we sort of further try to understand the poem, as we also grow as researchers or as we grow as students, we realize that the poem is not merely a text in this way. Rather, the poem has so multiple significations, multiple discourses embedded in it. And since we can thus have multiple discourses, multiple significations embedded in it, what we can do is what we understand is it has a sort of more or all inclusive textuality. That is to say, text here would could refer to like let's say the poem as a critique of colonialism, the poem as a critique of, so to say, um, something like let's say the British way of controlling, as a critique of. Therefore, I talked about the two ends and how they relate to the two different kinds of the House of Commons versus the House of Lords, and the colors that are implied in it. So, what one is trying to say by that all inclusive, which once again I would accept that is a kind of problematic term if we were to look at post-structuralism as questioning all inclusiveness. What I understand, that I understood what you were trying to sort of point at. What I meant was we can have a so to say interplay of multiple discourses. If I have clarified what I meant by that, I accept that all inclusive could be a problematic term. Maybe while I was explaining, it got used. Sorry.
Right. Certainly, madam. And even this post-structuralism has a tendency to reveal the concealments. That was also a statement that you mentioned.
Yes, yes.
That also, I would request you to slightly simplify for our students, especially the postgraduate students who are listening.
Okay. Uh, Okay, now let us look at the other example that I gave. That is why I began the analysis with examples instead of just sort of throwing about grand words. Let us look at the other example I tried to give. For example, look at the text that I was referring to. I'm consciously not saying work. I'm consciously saying text that I was referring to the Devdas. Now, if we look at Devdas, what is the how do people typically read the novel? People typically tend to read the novel the way Sanjay Leela Bhansali does it, as a love triangle. Now, one would like to say that actually there are multiple concealings of very many discourses and their power operations within the text, whether as a literary work or whether as a kind of its intersemiotic translations as films, as different kinds of films. And I tried to show how there are these layered meanings which may not be obvious to a student right in the beginning, but as we learn the, so to say, um, post structuralist mode of entering a text, maybe we start understanding how the multiple discourses are working in the text, and therefore these concealed meanings start being apparent to us. Have I made myself clear?
Yes, yes. Thank you, madam. Ruthvi, please take over. Professor Madge has raised her hand.
Uh, Madge, sir, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I'll do that. Dr. Pratima, let me congratulate you first for compressing so much material in such a short spell of time.
Thank you, sir.
I also would like to compliment you on showing the problems in post structuralism, uh, at least some of the problems that you wanted to highlight. I should like to go back to this term, which Mark also raised, all inclusivity. Just would like to know, where does all end? Are there
Um,
any limits to all? Meaning, which inclusivity is all inclusivity? Because there is a fashion in contemporary theory which Raymond Tallis deprecated. There is a fashion to pillory an author not for having said something, but for not having said also something. So does Jane Austen is pilloried for not speaking a word against the sugar plantations in the West Indies? So taking that into account, I would like to just ask you, where does all end? Or is it a common, meaning just no end to it?
yeah, I accept that. That is why I opened up the problems with post structuralism towards the end of my paper. And
Yes,
I may say that that is why I kept on saying that. uh, Okay, I'll clarify it this way. I was under the impression that one has to, I mean, that's what I wrote to Sinha sir as well, Sinha sir as well as Joshi sir, that I am supposed to address both
yes.
scholars like you all and at the same time
Okay.
students as well. So
So,
given all that, one was attempting that, and I did sort of clearly mention that there are problems with post-structuralism, number one. And as for like what you were talking about, Jane Austen being pilloried for not referring to sugar plantations, there are any number of post-colonial critics of Jane Austen,
yes,
and they show how she has a kind of complex relationship
it's
with
complete. Yes,
so
yes,
sure, all inclusivity never would end,
yes,
everything would be there and nothing could be there also, because
yes.
most often when you are extending meaning like that, it spreads so thin that nothing, there is no meaning left at all. So
Exactly.
I accept that, but I use these kind of terms because I was, as I said, I was addressing both the
Yes,
students and scholars like you all.
yes. Yeah, no,
And I have question I mean, I have problems with post-structuralism in a big way. So I would accept that all is a very thinly spread thing, and there are problems with all
Yes.
because all will never end.
One can,
And maybe post-structuralism would say that it should never end. Post-structuralists typically would say it should never end, and therefore all should go on. It should go on being all, and all. They would say, why is there a need to end at all?
yes,
Which I do not sort of agree with. But yes, they would agree that way that why should there be any end at all? Therefore, I gave you that other example, looking at Othello, and saying that the villain there is not at all Iago, but rather Roderigo. I can say I can give yet another meaning that the real heroine is not Desdemona at all. Fine,
yes,
and fine. So all can go on extending. That's what they would argue, which
yes,
I do not agree with. But I have to present it so that
good.
students would appreciate it. So
Yes,
therefore, I critiqued it as well.
yes. I do not know whether you have heard of this book. There is a book that came out in 2005 called The Empire of Theory, edited by Nick, who is this? Daphne Patai and Wilfred Corral. It's a one-stop volume on what she calls counter theory. So it's a very eye-opening book on the futility of theory. So I don't know whether you have heard of it. And I was saying you can answer back those people like Edward said that if Jane Austen did not speak about the sugar plantations in the West Indies, she also did not speak about the outbreak of diarrhea among the Napoleonic foot soldiers. So the sky is the limit for an author not saying anything about many things in the world. He's silent about so many things. So that way one can answer back, Edward said, and refute all his arguments.
May I respond to that? I would say that to begin with, M.H. Abrams is a brilliant critique of this entire theory to begin with, and he's absolutely brilliant stuff. And I would say that maybe this author that you're referring to must have been somewhere, surely, one would like to say, has had an effect or has learned something maybe from. For sure, Abrams. I would also like to say that there is another wonderful book which I read after theory.
Yeah.
That is also a great book. Fine. I would like to argue to your objection. I would like to argue that why should I try to refute um, Said? Said has every right to put forth his argument.
Yes.
That's what the post-structuralism would say. Post-structuralism would say it is an open text. The text can have infinite,
Yes.
all-inclusive possibilities. He has his opinion. It's not compulsory that I have to agree with his
Yes.
interpretation or with his
Yeah.
analysis or understanding, but that's okay. That's okay. I don't either refute or accept.
Okay. Unfortunately, he's not as liberal as you are. That's where the problem comes up. With
Sorry,
most,
sir. Sorry.
he's not as liberal or open-minded as you are. He's, to use your own word, he's a bit authoritarian.
For sure. But that's his position, sir.
That is where the problem comes up with most of the theories.
That is
Professor
what,
Madge,
that's what I ended with.
Liberalism.
Sure, sir. But
Professor Madge, I think Edward Said's comments either on Jane Austen or he also made observations on Joseph Conrad,
Yes.
you'll remember,
Yeah.
does not in any way, of course, bring down the height of either Jane Austen or Joseph Conrad.
Yes.
So people like people like Said would come and go, but these canonical texts would remain. So yes, what Dr. Agnihotri is trying to prove is that it's very fascinating, the theory of deconstruction.
Yes.
But in our pragmatic world, we need a structured world, of course.
Exactly.
So and she mentioned your text. She mentioned M.H. Abrahams's beautiful essay for the students might like to read, Deconstructive Angel.
Yes.
This is a very
Yes.
slim,
Yes.
very slim essay.
Yes.
Deconstructive Angel. It is shorter than Terry Eagleton's After Theory, of course.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
True.
Yeah.
No, actually, there have been many attacks on these theories, rabbit theories.
True, sir.
One of them, most succinct one that I read up was Dr. Raymond Tallis, with whom I had some correspondence also. Dr. Raymond Tallis has two books, one on structuralist Saussureans. The name of the book is also a verbal play on the word Saussure. So the title of his book is Not So Sure. And the other book is Euphoria and After. And you'll be surprised to know Dr. Raymond Tallis is a medical doctor, not an. He is interested in the happenings in the English department, and he was appalled by them. He said it was the degradation of English department in Oxford and Cambridge.
So it reminds you of the old C.P. Snow and F.R. Lewis debate, I suppose.
Yes.
The two cultures debate.
Yes, they are meaning such a literary theory, he says, is intellectually demeaning, degrading. Of course, nowadays we can talk about this all. In the 1970s and 80s, it was impossible to say a word against theory.
To that, if I may sort of add a point, that's what I said, that slowly but surely all the theories coalesce into a, sorry to use a word, intellectual mafia.
Yes.
And sorry to use that word, but it does coalesce into that, and you have to be with them, or you are left out in every which way.
Yes, absolutely. What you're saying.
They were called the Yale Mafia, isn't it? They were called, the word mafia was used.
Yes.
They were called the Yale Mafia.
Yeah, and these mafia expect the students to carry on their battles. That is another thing, because they occupy positions of power, key positions, nodal positions, and they want their students to carry on the battles. If the students don't, they fail them. So poor students, they have to toe the line of their own teachers, no matter how they, whether they like it or not.
Sir, a wonderful repartee was made by Bell Hooks in her essay Postmodern Blackness, where she said that all these post-structuralists are white, they are mostly European, and they are men. So,
Yeah.
and they make hardly any sense to so many other people, including African American and women.
Yes. No, but they are feminists also. So perhaps he omitted Helen Siku, Irix, Julia Kristeva. Of course, she is a renegade, according to them.
Sir, if I may just add up a name in the ongoing discussion, soon after Terry Eagleton's After Theory, we have Reading After Theory by Manica and Cunningham.
Yeah.
So he just adds up this word reading in bracket, and then some in some very implicit way sort of redirects us towards texts in the beginning of the 21st century.
Terry Eagleton, of course, mocks theory itself in his slim book, The Significance of Theory.
the
Yeah.
where he
significance of
says
theory.
that anything can be a theory. If I say this is a coffee mug, that is also theoretical because it can be interpreted that way.
Yes, yes.
There was a question on eco-criticism, Parth or Rutvi. Did you find
Yes,
it, please?
please, Ruthvi,
Yeah.
carry on.
Yes, Siddhi madam has typed in for a participant. How can we relate eco-criticism and post-structuralist theories?
Uh, okay. Uh, Others also can pitch in, but let me think of another example so that one can uh, sort of, I'm trying to think of yet another example from beyond the Wordsworthian poem. Just give me a nanosecond. In the meantime, if anybody else also wants to pitch in, that's fine. So, uh, okay, since I'm talking offhand, but since Sir was mentioning about, like, let's say, Jane Austen, and like the way she does not talk about lots of things, fine. Uh, in a way, Jane Austen is not even talking about the industrialization of England and the way it was impacting the class structure. Often it has been said that Jane Austen's novels or heroes are the last of the gentlemen, so to say. They depict the last of gentlemen, so to say. Now, since she is looking at a focused kind of thing, she will not talk maybe about the so to say environment. I mean, I cannot consciously find environmental consciousness or eco-criticism in her text. Fine. But if I were to, on the contrary, read like Jane Eyre, in Jane Eyre, there is somewhere a constant analysis of how it's not just the birth, but how the conditions of England then, were sort of fragmenting, and how it had an impact on the individual. Much better example, obviously, would be Tess. Hardy's test, wherein the agrarian England was giving way. In fact, all of Hardy's novels was giving way to essentially mm,
Really.
industrialized society, and how the so to say the defeat that Tess faces, or the destruction of Tess, is in a way destruction of that original. Once again, I'm using the word original, but that England, which was, one would like to say, the um, environmentally, environmentally, professionally, every which way balanced England. So one can start reading meanings if one wants in this way. Once again, this is offhand. I'm just thinking through all along.
Mm. May I just butt in now that we are talking
Please, please,
about
sir.
this, just to show you the difference between these modern theories and conventional approach to, or a new critical approach to literature. Tony Tanner has an excellent essay on the color and symbolism in Tess. And he says that in Tess, the color white and red
Hmm.
always go hand in hand. And he analyzes many incidents in the novel where he shows white and red always go together there in Hardy's novel. And he cites something like 289 examples, and thereby then he concludes by saying, what is this? This is a red stain against a white background. That sums up the entire novel. So the image, the coexistence, the juxtapositioning of white and red epitomizes the entire novel. Look at this very close reading of the text with what René could call extrinsic study of literature, industrial revolution, and this and that, where, meaning which approach gives you a better insight into the art of the novelist. That is the question that every student of literature has to answer for himself or herself and follow that approach accordingly. Meaning, I don't say this or that, but one has to decide for oneself.
In a way, the coming slightly back to the question that connects post-structuralism and eco-criticism, I would say that eco-criticism certainly does not want the decentering of the subject. It wants subject, it wants the human agency.
Exactly.
So that this earth is fit for us. Otherwise, this earth will remain in any which way. Since we are talking about films, for example, there's a wonderful film called Wall-E. Wall-E. It shows that the earth remains, but humans are no longer there. So eco-criticism certainly would want agency, a human agency, the subject, human subject, repairing the mistakes that we have been blundering along. That would be a kind of a connection. So it is between, say, post-structuralism. I mean, eco-criticism would certainly critique post-structuralism in that way.
I only hope these eco people are not accused of geocentrism.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Structuralists would attack them, bringing back geocentrism.
But sir, eco-criticism is not just, although it began as an offshoot of, literary critical theoretical discipline with ASLE getting established, but it has so many other scientific dimensions. So eco-criticism should be aware. I think it is aware of its own limitations.
Yes, that's true.
There's another question in the chat box. How does post-structuralism influence our understanding of identity in the digital age?
That's what I was trying to open up also, but it didn't. How would you all react to that? Because that's the biggest challenge, I would say, to our kind of departments, so to say. So that was what I tried to mention. But how would you all respond to that? Otherwise, later on, I'll also sort of join in. Since there are such wonderful scholars, maybe I'd like to listen to them first, and then I'd like to join in.
Anyone from the members present in the meeting, from the student side or from younger research scholars side, who would want to present their deliberations on this question?
It's a very silent group.
Or rather, it is a very difficult problem, so to say.
I would like to say, maybe we could begin this way, that what does the digital world do to us? So to say, we can have multiple selves, multiple identities, and many of these identities need not be the so-called real self at all. So in a way, when we are looking at the world as defined by, there is anyway a criticism called digital humanities. So I will not go into that. I will not talk right now about digital humanities. One reason I'm generally sort of explaining it, I would like to say that when you are into these multiple identities, you are trying to do two things. Number one, you are deceiving yourself. You are deceiving yourself. You are trying to get yourself an identity, a self which does not exist, but which you want to prove to the world and to prove to yourself as well. So maybe that needs to be opened up. How that identity gets constituted, that needs to be opened up. And another possibility could be when you assume these multiple identities, you are also trying to deceive the world. The way, for example, banking frauds go on. So then you are once again assigning yourself a kind of agency. So it's both. It's a kind of double game, fine, wherein you are an agent. You have the agency as well, and at the same time, maybe you are also trying to hide yourself from yourself also. So maybe the only answer to such a thing would be self-reflexivity. Trying self-reflexivity, trying to understand what maybe. Once again, as I said, digital humanity, I'm not answering it from the position of digital humanity, so to say. I'm talking, mm, if one may say so, through my. So,
So
the
one
consider
can say actually that post-structuralism actually anticipated artificial intelligence in the unraveling of identities,
yeah, sure, one
in
can
the
surely
in the
argue that.
disclosing of the layers of identities, some
Yes,
very negative and some positive.
in that notion called digital humanities, they do talk about the relevance between post-structuralism and the sort of the digital world. There is clear discussion of that, but I thought why unnecessarily get into more theory, which Sinha sir does not like, right?
Yeah, actually, we have 7-8 minutes remaining to the conclusion of the session, and we have still not uh, reached to Sinhasa's remarks.
And that is why I mentioned Sinha sir.
Uh, Mukherjee sir, if there are
So
more questions.
yeah. We have not heard from Sinha sir. Now the last 7-8 minutes we must hear
Yes,
him.
solely,
Sir, please.
solely for him.
Yeah.
But before Sinha sir starts, may I say something? Just 1 minute.
Please.
Sir was talking about teachers teachers using students to fight their battles. Undoubtedly, that is a reality. But I would like to say that there are many students who are not that innocent either. They know which bandwagon to jump onto. They perfectly don't know which bandwagon to jump onto. So, I would like to say that students, there are very many students who are also very smart, who are sort of not manipulated by their teachers, so to say. They might be manipulating their, instead of teachers manipulating them, they might be manipulating
Oh,
teachers
yes.
also. One never knows. There are all sorts of mafias.
We don't know. That is what I'm saying. They fight the battles. The students seem to agree with the teachers to get marks. Once they get the marks, then they'll forget theory and forget everything else.
Not only
Let,
that,
let
but
us let us hear
if you
let us
have
hear
the
from our grand teacher.
if we
Sir,
have the right connections, you
Yes.
can manage everything, no?
No,
You
no,
can get a perfect job, you can get a perfect scholarship. So obviously students also manipulate in multiple ways.
no,
If you do not, you are in a soup.
yeah. No, but
yeah, Dr. Agnihotri, we can now move on to Professor Sinha now. Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Of course,
please.
that is why I'm
Yeah,
invited
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So we
Sir, you have
can't
to
hear
unmute
you.
yourself,
Your mic.
or you have to increase your volume.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir, yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, I must mention that Pratima did a commendable job, a remarkable job in condensing in 45 minutes time so many ideas. And it's obviously an umbrella term, and we can't be sure what is covered and what cannot be covered. I do want to get back for a minute to my own student days and remark that as early as 1960, when we were being taught upon Westminster Bridge in the intermediate class, my teachers pointed out that there is a basic uh, paradox at the heart of the poem. He mentions that the poem has city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, silent, bare, ships' towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie. Now, in case the city is wearing uh, like a garment, then how can things be bare and open? So, no, he did not need any theory. At that time, no theory had come into being, but I'm sure he could point out this thing very, very early. He also told us that the expression, a size so touching in its majesty, is also a slightly paradoxical expression because something so majestic cannot be touching. So obviously, there is a kind of a play upon words in this poem. And coming then to Devadas, let's remember that the majority of film versions of Devadas have taken too many liberties with the text. If I can think of one very, very, I should say, faithful version, it's very difficult for me to come across a name. See, there's one text that was one film not mentioned by anyone, and that was supposed to be a dull film, but maybe that was closer to the spirit, and that was the film in which K.L. Sahgal acted the main role. Sahgal was given the role not because he was a good actor, but because he was a great singer, and so he served the purpose well. But remember, in that film also, they had emphasized the role of Paro's, I should say, Paro's brother-in-law. When she goes to the new house, she has to deal with big children, who the stepmother she is, and one person who is sympathetic is the brother-in-law. So obviously, no text is absolutely, I should say, faithful, and people have taken liberties. Wordsworth's poem is one that has had an unending life. I remember in the year 2002, they brought out a volume about Westminster Bridge, and multiple rereadings of the of the poem were given there. So I don't think that these texts, even without theory, would die out. They are going to live. Well, thank you all. See, mine were strictly, I should say, a novice's comments. I'm not at all an expert in this theory. So I guess I could say what I wanted to say and go back to
So that was very modest of you. Your insights into text are always so illuminating. So it was really very modest of you to say about. Sometimes, I mean, teachers like you take us back to the text. So, and that is, whether we call it work, whether we call it text, we have to depend on the lines, black lines on the white page. And there are some teachers like you who take us back to that. I was incidentally, sir, I was talking to my students today. When you type on the Google a poem, the first thing that Google gives you is not the poem, but the summary of the poem.
Yes.
Anybody can type that. So we went to do, for example, an Emily Dickinson poem. First comes summary. And then you have to scroll down to find the actual text, the poem. So we need to go back to the text and understand it. And if theory helps us, okay, good. Actually, deconstruction is a way of reading for us students of literature. It is a way of reading. So that is what we can take. It is one more way of reading.
Mm.
So I think Parth and Rutvi and Sinha sir, we are nearing time. I would like to thank everyone for this very interactive. With at least some people interacted, and of course, as people have been mentioning, and this very compressed and yet very comprehensive talk on post-structuralism.
Thank you so much, sir. We are really sorry we had to cut short upon the very interesting discussions that were happening. But then we had to keep on time. We are also really sorry we were about 5 minutes late to begin because of some issues with the logging in into the Gmail account. I think there were 4 to 5 people who were not able to log in exactly at 5:15. So humble apologies for that. Time also to announce the topic of the next session. The next session most probably will be on postmodernism, and our speaker is going to be Dr. Shamik Malla. Shamik Malla is from VIT Chennai, and he's the managing editor of the Journal on Contemporary Thought, JCT. So most probably we are going to have Dr. Shamik next month. So we hope and invite all of you for the next session. However, the whatever is finalized, accordingly, the messages and the posters will be conveyed to you through messages or email. Thank you very much. The feedback link is there in the chat box. Request all of you to fill up the feedback link. Yes, Ruthi, please take it.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good time.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.